Hello, and welcome to our first lecture video on reinmed.org. This first module is called Building Blocks of Life, and we will be discussing um, beginning with atoms and molecules like DNA, proteins, to cells, to organs, how all of these structures come together to form the working human bodies that we enjoy. Now, a little background here. Um, this website is a work in progress, and I am developing the curriculum as I am moving along, making these videos. Please feel free to give suggestions as you are watching the videos, as you are doing the practice quizzes that follow. Please feel free to send me a message at contact@reinmed.org with any suggestions or questions that you may have. Also, you can follow on Facebook. We have a page, reinmed.org, where you can find our videos. You can share them with friends, and it's a good way to help involve others who might benefit from these videos, and you can help us to receive more feedback so we can make these videos in a way that is best for you. In this particular video, we will be talking about the chemical building blocks that make up our human bodies. This includes atoms. Here we have a diagram. We have a small depiction of an atom. Atoms can come together and they can form molecules like DNA, and different molecules like DNA, proteins, and fats and lipids, they can come together to form cells. And living cells they make up our organs that make up our human body. And so today we will begin by talking about atoms, then talk about molecules, which are combinations of atoms, and that will prepare you for our next lecture, which talks about cells and how cells do their job. Now, I do want to mention that all of the videos and practice quizzes on reinmed.org are created for educational purposes only. They are not a substitute for a professional medical education, and they are not meant to tell you how you must perform a diagnosis or treat patients. You should always follow the clinical guidelines of your institution where you are practicing medicine. You should follow the protocols established by your local health authorities or training institutions. I have made a good effort to try to make sure the information I'm sharing with you is accurate and it is up to date. But remember that medicine is always changing, and so anyone who uses this website is encouraged to verify to make sure information is up to date and to check with trusted sources to make sure that you are practicing according to your local guidelines. Also, in these videos and quizzes, I do use some images that are published online under Creative Commons license, and they're free for other people to use as well. And I have I've given attribution for these images at the end of the presentation. Okay, so we'll begin with a little summary about atoms. Atoms are the basic building blocks of all matter, of everything you can see around you. And some of you who have studied chemistry, you will know that in the center of atoms, which we call the nucleus, there are different particles. There are protons, which have a positive charge, and there are neutrons, which have zero charge. Around the nucleus, we find electrons, and these electrons have a negative charge. And so the negative charge of the electrons is attracted to the positive charge of the protons, right? The negative charge of the electrons here is attracted to the positive charge of the protons. And so they pull each other towards each other. And that's what keeps the electrons close to the nucleus, the nucleus is in the middle of the atom. Now, electrons, they can go into different orbitals based on how much energy they have. And for you, it's just important to know that for a given atom with a nucleus, it has a certain number of electrons. And sometimes when atoms come together, they can share electrons. They can share electrons, and then they become a molecule, where now they are sharing electrons with each other. Now, there are many different types of atoms. This image here you may have seen before. It is called the periodic table of elements, and it lists the different kinds of atoms that we find in nature. And you can see in the top right-hand corner of each box, there is a number, and the number tells you how many protons that atom contains. So if we start with hydrogen, in the nucleus of the hydrogen atom, we have one proton. And around the hydrogen atom, we have one electron. And the electron has a negative charge. And it is held close to the nucleus by that charge. However, the helium atom here, you can see it has a number 2. The helium atom has 2 protons in the nucleus. It also has some neutrons as well, which I'll draw in yellow. Remember, the neutrons, they have 0 charge. So there's the proton and neutron, and around it, it has the same number of electrons as protons. So you can see here, the hydrogen atom has the 1 electron and 1 proton. Then helium has 2 protons and 2 electrons. And it increases like thus, like you see here. So we have 2, and then 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in oxygen, 9 in fluorine, 10 in neon. Now, a few other comments about the periodic table here. Elements here that are close to the right-hand side, it is easy for them to lose an electron. So if we have an atom here that has a nucleus with a lot of protons in it, and it has some electrons, it is easy for an electron to be lost. Sorry, I said that backwards. It is easy for it to gain an electron. So these atoms here on the right-hand side, they can gain an extra electron. And that will make them have a negative charge. But for atoms here on the left-hand side, these atoms can easily lose an electron. And that will give them a positive charge. So if we have here a hydrogen atom, it could lose that electron. And now it is just a proton. And that leaves it with a positive charge. So this will become important as we move on to talk about different ways that atoms can combine with other atoms. Now, some of the most common atoms that we see in the human body include, we have carbon here, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine. These are all very common in the human body, and they make up, and chlorine not as much. But these molecules, in addition to hydrogen, they make up a lot of the compounds that are in the body. Okay. In chemistry, when we are drawing how different atoms and molecules combine, there's certain standard ways that we like to draw it. So here you can see for the nucleus, we often write the letter that represents the name of the molecule. So for hydrogen, we have an H, and the hydrogen has one electron in its outer shell. It has one available electron. Carbon here has 4 available electrons. Now, when atoms come together and they get linked together, they can create a molecule. A molecule is a combination of atoms. So if a carbon atom and a hydrogen atom come together, the hydrogen atom can share one of its electrons, and the carbon atom can share an electron. So now they are sharing 2 electrons with each other. And that makes what we call a chemical bond. So this line represents those 2 electrons. And it's going to hold the carbon atom and the hydrogen atom together. And that makes a molecule. There are many common molecules that we find in the human body. One molecule that you have heard of is water. And water contains an oxygen atom, and the oxygen atom has 6 available electrons. It also has in water there is 2 hydrogen atoms as well. And so to make a molecule, the hydrogen and oxygen atoms, they share electrons with each other. And so those electrons I've circled, they become a bond. So then you have the leftover electrons of the oxygen, and you have the hydrogen here, and they are connected with the chemical bond formed by the electrons. And this is how molecules are formed, when atoms come together and they are connected by their electrons and they make a molecule. Now, a lot of the molecules that you will see in health sciences involve carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and sometimes other elements like phosphorus or sulfur. Those are very common to see in molecules in the human body. And sometimes to make writing a little shorter, when we are drawing these diagrams, if our molecule includes carbon, because carbon is so common, sometimes we don't draw it. For example, if we had a molecule here that is a carbon and it has these hydrogens and there's another carbon here and the hydrogens, instead of drawing all the carbons, I'll show you some other ways we can write that same molecule here on the right. So one way we can draw it is we can leave out the C and just draw the lines. And when people read that, we know that it means a carbon atom. It refers to carbon. So if I go like this, right here, it means there is a carbon atom. And alternatively, because there are so many hydrogens as well, the hydrogens are very common in the body, sometimes we don't draw those either. And so we would just have a molecule that looks like this. And this means that there are 3 hydrogens here and 3 hydrogens here. And that makes up our molecule. So these are some different ways that we can draw molecules in the human body. So we talked a bit about how molecules can form connections with each other and create bonds. Here, we're going to talk about another important concept in the chemistry of the human body, and this is ionic compounds. So ions are atoms that have gained an electron or lost an electron. So here we have Na, which refers to sodium, and Cl, which refers to chloride. And this is salt. It's the same thing that you put on your food. You can use it to help your food store longer or to make it taste better. So salt is made up of sodium and chlorine atoms. The sodium atom has 1 free electron, and the chlorine has 7. But the chlorine atom, because it wants an electron so much, it can take the electron from the sodium. So then the sodium has no electron, and it has a positive charge. The chlorine gains an electron. Now it has a negative charge. And so in the body, you will hear us talk more about electrolytes. And electrolytes are ions or small molecules that have a charge. And so they are important in many different ways in the body. They do different jobs. Here are some examples of electrolytes in medicine that are very common. We talked about sodium. The letters that we use for sodium on the periodic table are Na, and sodium does many jobs. It has 1 available electron, and when it's an electrolyte, it has lost that electron, so it has a positive charge. And the sodium electrolyte, it is important for our nerves, so that our nerves can send signals, so that our brain can work. It is also important in our blood. It helps our body control how much water we have in our blood and in our cells. Potassium is also another very important electrolyte. Potassium is found in the blood. It is in our nerves to help our nerves and our brain work. And it's also in the heart. And it helps our heart control the contractions. It helps our heart rhythm. And so if we have too little or too much potassium, our heart can stop working correctly. Chloride is another common electrolyte. It is in the blood and in other areas. So it's balanced with sodium. And if the chloride gets too high or too low, that can be related to acid-base problems, where the blood has too much acid or too much base. Bicarbonate is a small molecule, and it has a carbon, and it has 3 oxygens, and it has a hydrogen that can be lost or that it can pick up again. And the bicarbonate also helps control the acid-base balance in your blood. So it helps your blood not have too much acid or too much base. It helps your blood stay at the right level. Calcium is a common electrolyte. It's an atom that has lost its electrons. So now it's lost 2 electrons. So now it has a positive charge. And calcium is very common in your muscles. so that your muscles can contract and relax. It's also important for nerves, and it's important in your heart for your heart rhythm. And we have another electrolyte, magnesium. Magnesium here is represented by the letters Mg. It has a positive charge because it has lost 2 electrons. And magnesium is important for several different things. It helps your body control the sodium levels, and it also helps your heart rhythm. And our last electrolyte here that is very common is phosphate. And phosphate is important in your bones. It's also important in your cells when your cells are making and storing energy. And in phosphate, it has a phosphorus and 3 oxygens, and the whole atom has a very negative charge. So this electrolyte has a negative charge, and it's used in your bones and in your cells for energy. So you don't have to remember everything about these electrolytes right now, but as we move forward in the videos, we will talk more about electrolytes. And just remember, electrolytes, they are atoms that have lost or gained electrons. They have a positive or negative charge, and there's many different jobs that they do in the body. All right, so now that we've talked a bit about atoms and molecules, we're going to move on to talk about the larger molecules in the human body. And remember, a molecule is a combination of atoms where atoms have come together. Remember, we talked about how carbon and hydrogen could come together and they could share their electrons and they can make a bond where they are connected. So this is how we were talking about how atoms can come together and make a molecule. Now there are many molecules that are much bigger than this. They have many, many atoms, tens of atoms, even hundreds of atoms or thousands of atoms, all arranged to make a molecule or a macromolecule, which is just a very big molecule. And so now we're going to talk about some of those macromolecules. A very important macromolecule is carbohydrates. There are simple carbohydrates that are small, and these we often call sugars. There are also complex carbohydrates, which are combinations of sugars attached to each other. So I know that many people watching these videos, you probably enjoy candy, you probably enjoy fruit, and you enjoy foods that are sweet. And the sweetness comes from sugar. This here is a diagram of a sugar molecule. Remember when we were talking about bonds earlier, we said that when there is no letter, that means there is a carbon atom. And so in this diagram here, these are the carbon atoms. The H's are for hydrogen and the O is for oxygen. So here we have a carbon atom as well. And so you don't have to remember all of these connections, but I just want you to understand that sugar molecules, they have carbon and they have hydrogens and they have oxygen, and they are all connected together in a way that makes a sugar molecule. And most of the time, the sugar molecules are in this ring form here. They're in a circular form. And this is the way you'll see them most often in the body. But this diagram here shows what happens when the ring breaks open, and it can make it easy for you to see how the sugar molecule is formed with carbon atoms in the middle making the backbone of the molecule, and then you have oxygen and hydrogen attached. And that's where the name comes from. Carbo for carbon and hydrate because it has the oxygen and hydrogen, and these together, that is water. That's 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So you're taking water and adding it to carbon. Okay, so I told you there were simple carbohydrates like sugar, but there is also complex carbohydrates. And so if you look here, you can see this is one sugar molecule. Here's another sugar, and another, and another, and another. And they are all connected. So if you look closely here, you can see there's a connection, and a connection, and a connection, and a connection. When the sugars are all connected, that makes a polysaccharide, or a complex carbohydrate. And foods that you know that have complex carbohydrates in include rice, bread, potatoes. Lots of vegetables have lots of starch and carbohydrates like this, complex carbohydrates. They are good sources of energy because sugar and carbohydrates, they are used in our body to make energy. And we will talk more about that in the later videos, how your body can take the carbon atoms, and it will make from those CO2 gas, and it will take the oxygen, hydrogen, and make water. And that gives you energy. Trying to draw a lightning bolt. That gives you energy. So this is how your food gives you energy. Okay, now that we've talked about carbohydrates, let's talk about another very important molecule in the human body. This one is commonly called DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And to explain the structure of this molecule, if you look at the diagram here on the right, these black lines here, it's a simplified drawing. In the black lines, this is the backbone of the DNA, and it is made from carbohydrates. It is made from small sugar molecules, and the sugar molecules are all attached to each other. And there's 2 strands, there's 2 lines of the DNA, and each is made from the sugar molecules, and they are wrapped around each other and they twist like this. In the middle of the molecule, in the middle, you see there are these connections between the outside. Oh, I don't like that green. Let me change the color here. I'll clean this up so you can see clearly. So in the middle, we have these connections here. And these connections are from base pairs. They're little molecules that connect between the sugar molecules. And they have a special combination, and they form a code that stores information telling your body instructions. So this is how your cells in your body know what to do, because they have the DNA, and the DNA gives them the instructions. And the name we use for these instructions is genes. Now there are different names for the bases, the little molecules that give the instructions, and we use letters to represent them. And so we have combinations of them. So they have different names like cytosine, guanine, and they have a preferred combination. So the G always pairs with the C, and the A always pairs with the T. And as your body combines these, so if you have an A and a T, and then you have a C and a G, these letters here, they give your body the instructions of what to do. And that's how your DNA stores the information. This is a more complicated image. And of course, you don't need to remember all of this, but this shows you here these gray ones. These are carbon, and you can see the carbon atoms going along the side here of the backbone. And then we have more carbon atoms here. And those are the sugars. And in the middle, we have the bases. And the bases have a lot of the nitrogen. And these, remember, they give the information. They store the genetic code that gives your body the instructions of what to do. Here's another diagram. The blue line here, that is the sugars that make the backbone of the DNA. And the letters here are the bases giving us the instructions. And one thing that is so amazing about DNA is even though the molecules are so long and they have so much information, so much of the instructions, your body can make copies of the DNA. And the way it works, I'll draw for you. Let's pretend this is some DNA. And on the side, we have the sugars that make the backbone. And in the middle, we have the bases giving the instructions. Now, when your cells want to split and they want to divide and make copies, in order to make copies of the DNA, they pull the DNA apart. So the DNA can split. See here how the bases, the letters in the middle, they got pulled apart, they split. So if we split off this side of the DNA here, then your body can read these letters. It can read all the letters here on this strand, and it can make another copy of DNA to match. And it knows that with A comes T, with G is C, A, T, and with T, A. Whoops. Here, I'll erase that. With T, A. And this way, when your body needs to make copies of the DNA, it can store all the information. Now, I told you that DNA gives your body instructions. But what type of instructions? The information that DNA gives you specifically is instructions of how to build proteins. And proteins are big molecules that do the important jobs in the human body and that build everything. Proteins build your muscles, they build your cells, they make many hormones, and so proteins, they are some of the most important molecules in the body. Now, the DNA, it has all these letters, right? It has the bases. Now, your body can come along and it has these big proteins that come and they read these letters. And for every 3 letters that they read, they will that will give your body instructions of how to make a protein, and it uses amino acids. And amino acids, they are like little bricks, or they're like little Lego pieces. And your body can choose from among all the amino acids and stick them together to make a big combination of amino acids that we call a protein. So if you want to imagine it in an analogy, the DNA is like a book, and all the bases, they are like the letters in the book. And in your body, the cell comes along and it can read the letters, and every 3 letters on the DNA inside your genes gives instructions and tells your body which amino acid to add. And so it will add one and add another and another and another and another as it reads down your gene until it makes a big protein, which is a combination of all these amino acids. And then the protein can do important jobs in your body so that your body can be healthy. So here is a diagram of multiple amino acids that have been connected. This is one, and this is one, and this is one. And so we have carbon here forming a lot of the backbone of this molecule. And oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and all these amino acids are connected to build something bigger, the protein that will do an important job for the human body. All right, on this slide we're going to talk about another type of molecule called lipids. And what makes lipids special is that they are made up of mostly carbon and hydrogen. Now, we talked about how when we are drawing molecules, to make it more simple, sometimes we just use stick drawings instead of drawing all the letters and connections. So you can imagine in this molecule, you can see the C's represent carbon and the H represents hydrogen. And there are a lot of letters and a lot of connections in this molecule. So it could be complicated to read and to draw. So to make it more simple, what we do is for each of these connections between the carbons, we just draw it as a line. Sorry, I did that incorrectly. So we draw the first connection, the second, and then the third connection. And so this here is a carbon, 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 and off of the carbon is coming the hydrogens. But we don't draw all the hydrogens. We just use our stick drawing method like we talked about earlier. So as you look here, you can see the stick drawing, which shows all the connection between the carbon atoms. And when there is a different atom mixed in, we use the letter to show what it is. So here we have oxygen, more oxygen. Here's a P for phosphorus and an N for nitrogen. Now here I'm going to give a brief summary of some very important lipids in the body. One here is cholesterol. You can see all these hexagon connections of carbons that are connected to each other. And this molecule, cholesterol, can be modified in many different ways with different atoms being connected, with changes being made to it. And it can become a hormone. And hormones, they send important signals in the body, right? You have heard of testosterone or estrogen. These are sex hormones that help a man's body to look like a man and a woman's body to look like a woman. And so these hormones, they are lipids. They are hormones that are mostly carbon and hydrogen with a few modifications. Another important type of lipid in the body are fatty acids. And so you can see here in this diagram that the fatty acid is mostly carbons and hydrogens. But at one end, there are some oxygens. And this is an important way your body stores energy. Because remember, we talked about earlier how your body can use all these carbons and hydrogens to make carbon dioxide and to make water. And this gives your body lots of energy. So foods that have fat, right? Oil or fatty meat, these things have lots of these molecules here, the fatty acid molecules. And so they give your body lots of energy. And if you eat a lot of food, you notice your body gains fat. And that's this here, these same molecules. Your body is getting more of these fat molecules to store all that energy. And lastly, we will talk about how lipids, they are an important part of building cells. Remember, cells, they are small little building blocks that make the human body. We've talked about many different building blocks today, but cells, they are small living pieces of your body, and they all do different jobs. And this outer portion of the cell membrane, is made up from lipids. Specifically, it contains a lot of phospholipids, and that's what we will talk about on the next slide. So here we see a diagram of a phospholipid, and down here you can see the branching stick figure that represents the carbons and hydrogens, right? Because there are no letters, so it is just carbon and hydrogen. And on top, up here, we see there are many oxygens, there's phosphorus, and so these molecules here, one end, this red end, likes to be touching water, and this end here likes to hide from the water. And so on the next slide, I'll show how they come together and they form the membrane of your cell. So in this diagram here, you can see these red ends, that's the end of the phospholipid that likes water. And here in the middle, we have the end of the phospholipid that is hiding from the water. And so when all of these phospholipids here come together, they form this cell membrane. And out here, out on this end, this is the water outside of your cell. And on this end down here, this is the water inside the cell. And so this helps form a boundary because these lipids here, they come together and they can form basically a sac or a balloon all the way around the cell. So the water inside the cell is kept separate from the water outside the cell. Because remember, in the middle here, these tails of the phospholipids, they don't like water, and they keep the water away. And so that helps keep what's inside the cell safe inside the cell, and it keeps things outside the cell outside. Alrighty. So now we'll have a brief review here. We began this video talking about atoms. We talked about how inside atoms there are protons and there are neutrons in the nucleus. And then surrounding the atom, there are these electrons. And we also talked about how atoms, they can come together and they can share their electrons and make what we call a molecule. And a molecule is a combination of atoms. So to draw the hydrogen for the nucleus, we just use the letter H, which is the symbol for hydrogen. It can come together with a carbon atom, and it can share these two electrons. And when it shares, then it can make a connection. And we draw the two electrons that make the connection with a line. So now this hydrogen and carbon, they have formed a molecule. They came together, and now they are one big molecule. Now, if we keep connecting more and more atoms together, we can make bigger molecules. We talked about sugar molecules, which have oxygen and hydrogen connected to carbon, like this. We also talked about DNA, which has sugars that make these the backbone of the DNA, and connecting between the sugars we have the bases, which have the information for our genes, and these genes give our body instructions. And so our body can read the instructions. So if your body is reading the instructions, it can find the combination of three letters, and that will tell which amino acid to use. And so then your body can take amino acids and connect them together. I'll use a different color for the amino acids. Your body can take amino acids and connect them together and make proteins. And these proteins can do important jobs in your body. And finally, we talked about a group of molecules called lipids. And lipids are mostly carbons and hydrogens. We often draw them with stick figures like this. And sometimes lipids include other molecules as well, like this one. This is a fatty acid, and it has some oxygen, hydrogen, and a lot of carbons. And lipids can do many things like store energy. They can also create hormones that send messages in the body. And they are also important for building cells because they can form the bubble or the membrane around our cells to keep the water outside the cell separate from what is inside the cell. And so that's a brief review for you of some of the most important atoms and molecules that we talk about in medicine. Now I'm going to give you a look ahead at what we'll be talking about in our next lecture. This here is a diagram of a cell. The body is built up of millions and millions of cells, and inside cells, there are many different structures. We'll talk about what they do. On the outside here, you can see this is our cell membrane, the sac around the cell that keeps the water in the cell separate from the water outside the cell. In the middle of the cell, we have the nucleus, and that's where the DNA is stored that we talked about today. So in our next video, we will talk about how all of these different pieces we discussed today, how they come together to build cells and how cells do their job. Now, following our videos, I have made quizzes, and these quizzes will test you on the concepts we discussed in the video. So they are an opportunity for you to practice what you have learned. I hope you will take the time to do the quizzes because they will help you remember what we have discussed longer, and it will help you to clarify some things that maybe you didn't understand when you watched the video. The quizzes also give you feedback. So if you get an answer wrong, the quiz will tell you why you got it wrong, and it will show you what the correct answer should be. So if you have time, I think that doing the quizzes is a great way to continue your learning. And the following slides here are a thank you to all of the people who shared the images that we used in this presentation. They are all shared under a Creative Commons license. Some of them are free to use without attribution and some with attribution, but I have listed all of the people who contributed images that I have used in this presentation. So thank you for watching. Please take time to complete the quiz, and I will see you in our next video.